Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown, one of the biggest stories, conversations, flare points, I don't know what you want to call it, of the summer has been the surprise. We're maybe not doing renewables for a little bit in the province of Alberta. The decision for a 6-month, maybe 7-month, depends on how you count it, depends on whether or not you like the number 6 or 7 better, to suspend the approval of any renewable power plant over 1 megawatt caught a lot of people completely off guard. For a lot of people, it came entirely out of the blue. We're going to try to make a little bit of sense out of how does that all work? What is it exactly that happened? And there was a recent announcement about 18 new requirements that renewable projects are going to have to, may be required, I believe is the phrasing, because I love the ambiguity to that. What are those things going to potentially look like? With that announcement, there were a lot of people who are wondering, hey, is the moratorium over? Short answer, no. But in order to make sense of this all, we're going to go to somebody with some, let's call it lived experience in the field of energy projects. We're joined today by Lindsay Amantea.
Yes, that is how you say my name. Good job.
Perfect. I wrote it down to make sure I got it right. Who is a lawyer in the energy sector who had a bit of a day when this first announced. So before we get into the whole renewables thing, I also should mention, because if I don't, then I'm just being a crab host. Lindsay is, in fact, one of the co-hosts, I believe the technical term is, of the fantastic podcast, Your Province, Your Problem, with Deirdre Mitchell-McLean. And then it seems like you rotate in a few folks as you go throughout the thing.
Yeah. So it's myself, Deirdre, and Kathleen Smith, and whoever we can convince to spend an hour listening to me get slowly drunk and yell at people.
Perfect. There you go. That sounds like a wonderful way to spend an evening. Before we get into the renewable stuff, let's kind of get into what your cred is, if you will. So, in 5,000 words or less, who is Lindsay Amantea, and what's this whole renewable lawyer or energy lawyer thing all about?
Yeah, well, I've obviously been involved in politics for a couple decades. I will fully admit to being a card-carrying member of the Liberal Party of Canada, so you can all crucify me for that later. Um, but I have at various times participated in, the Progressive Conservative Party of Alberta. I was a UCP member when the party first formed, although I'm not a member of a provincial party now. I've also been a lawyer here in Calgary for the last 7 or 8 years. Part of my practice, I have a fairly broad practice, but part of my practice is in financing increasingly renewable energy companies. And so, this was as you vaguely alluded to. I think I actually had an aneurysm when this happened. I happened to be in Montreal in the midst of actually funding a deal for a grid connection project, and I I think I actually walked into like the closest thing to me to get lunch. I had been walking up and down St. Catharines to find something to eat. I think I ended up walking into a McDonald's, walking back to my office, and like trying frantically to log into my ISO account to look at the application we were funding for grid connectivity, and to find out if this impacted what we were doing. And so this is, as you said, it's definitely a lived experience for me. And so I think in that respect, I have a better perspective on what do these applications look like? Why does this matter? Where is this actually going to affect people, and whether or not it's going to have the impact seemingly that this government wants it to have, and whether or not that's even a valid sort of policy objective. I have done lots of public policy and public and legislative drafting over the course of the last 20 years, and so it's definitely something I've been heavily involved with. Less on the energy side, more on a couple of other files, but it's definitely, like I said, whether it's from the practical perspective, the legal perspective, or the public policy perspective, it's just something that I have spent a lot of time looking at and reading and trying to navigate. So yeah.
I thought it might be fun to I'm sure you're familiar. The provincial government released a fact sheet, if you will, where they asked questions and then didn't really answer them very well at all in the response part. I thought it might be fun to go through some of those questions to try to get a little bit of perspective. So to your understanding, well, actually, before we do that even, let's go back a little bit farther. What did you think of the process of the announcement? Because we saw the two letters that were released with the announcement, the one from the Alberta Utilities Commission and then the AESO, who I can't remember what all the letters stand for. But those two letters were definitely raised some eyebrows, because in one of them from the AUC, it was like, hey, so we've got some questions that we need to sort out. It would be great if we could do a look into those. And then the other one from the AESO of the exact same day was, hey, thanks for the heads up for the 6-month pause. Sounds great. We'll get burritos. And then they waited 2 weeks and then they announced it publicly. What did you make of that whole the rollout of the policy change or decision?
Yeah, I mean, it was sudden. It was definitely sudden. Obviously, it took everyone by surprise. I can tell you, I was like in the middle of actively giving someone money for this when this happened, and so I don't know how much more of a surprise I could possibly say that took us by. Obviously, industry was not aware. Applicants were not aware. I was not aware. And so, and particularly the interesting thing I would say about the letter, especially the one from ISO, it's AESO, and it's the independent operator for the grid. Um, uh, the letter wasn't posted until they made the announcement, and then it was posted on their website. And so, like, no one had a heads up. It wasn't like they posted a letter and a couple weeks later it happened. This was clearly a ministerial meeting that happened. They sent a letter saying thanks. And everything sort of got dumped on everyone on the same day. And so it was it didn't give anyone the opportunity to, if your application was sort of, at the end, try and sneak it in or like speed it up. And I think that was particularly unhelpful. One of the battle cries of this last election that we had was, we need certainty in business. We need certainty in business. We need certainty in business. People won't come here if we don't have certainty, and for take what you want from this, but the NDP does not provide certainty. Well, apparently neither does the UCP. This government has just completely violated that promise that they made in the last election that we only just had with respect to certainty for business owners and people bringing money into this province. Like, completely, because all they've shown us is they can turn on a dime without, consulting seemingly anybody, and just let us all know what they've decided after they've decided it. So,
is it normal for government to make a major decision about something like this? I mean, we are talking about, depending on whose reports you go with, upwards of 120 different projects that are going to be directly impacted. There's the question of the chill on the business community and the investment community into renewables. Is it a normal thing to see a government make a big decision like that and then just be like, but don't tell anybody for 2 weeks because we have an announcement. It's not going to be a press conference. We're just going to send out an email, but it'll cover everything. Is that a normal way?
I mean, you definitely see moratoriums on discussions outside of ministerial offices. Like that part is like fairly normal. What I would say is not normal about this announcement or the way that they've done this is two things. One, that there's no transition period to deal with the fact that like there are ongoing projects that are affected by this. And secondly, and this is a point I've made before in other spaces, the pause comes at the midway point in the application process. And it's the only part where the Utilities Commission is involved. But to understand why this is so problematic, you have to look at the entire process of a grid connectivity application because it doesn't start with the AUC. It actually starts with ISO, and it starts with making an application to get uh, trying to think of what the word is for it. But basically, the go ahead that there is a need for more connection to the grid. There is a need for further energy. The need exists because when you make that application, you say, okay, this is the part of the province that I want to do this in. This is where the grid is now. This is how much will have to be built in order to connect. Um, and they look at that application and they say, okay, yes, there's a need for it. We do need more energy, so let's keep going, right? Because if the answer was no, we're good, there's no point in continuing on that process. And so there's sort of that first step to say, okay, yeah, there is a need, and then you go through all of your environmentals and you go through a lot of your municipality applications and making sure you have the right land use. And you might not have to, you don't if you don't own the land, you don't have to lease it yet, but you do have to have agreements in place to be able to lease it, an option, if you will. You need to have had a conversation with whoever's going to construct the project. You need to have had a conversation with AltaLink and Fortis to make sure that they're on side, so when the connection actually comes, when someone literally plugs it into the grid, because that's what you do. You build a bunch of stuff and then you connect it to the grid. Um, that they're going to be okay with that when the time comes, and in a lot of ways they control that process and you sort of just pay for it, because they don't want you screwing up the rest of the grid by, I don't know, putting a nail in the wrong place or whatever goes on there. And so I'm a lawyer, not a construction worker. I don't know. But so all of these things are happening, and the AUC really comes in sort of at that midpoint in the process, and that's where we've paused these projects. We've paused them at there's a ISO has a nice little infograph, and it lists 5 steps, and we're pausing projects at step 3. And to give perspective, you're at least a couple of years into this by the time you're getting there. These projects are not, it's not like someone like last week was like, hey, we should build a solar farm. We're talking like you could have been 2 or 3 years into these projects, and now they're being paused. And I think that again just provides very little certainty, and um, is very problematic for some of these people who and some of these companies who have invested a lot of money and a lot of time into this process.
So I just want to make sure that I'm wrapping my head around this properly. If I understand this correctly, a lot of people took a look at the pause and went, "Oh, people aren't going to start the process because they're not allowed to, because the AUC has said we're going to put a 6 or 7 month pause on this thing." And the reality is that, I mean, technically, people could conceivably still go through the first 2 steps of the process, but it also caught people who were already through the first 2 steps of the process. So there's companies and organizations that have put time and money and effort into getting to step 3, and they were told, "Just kidding, maybe." Am I getting that right?
Yeah, pretty much. So you could have uh, for you could have been years into this, $100,000, $200,000 into your environmental reports and your hydrology reports and um, uh, drafting the applications. I've made this point before, but the application process isn't a like I give you a bunch of information and you make a decision. It's a dialogue. And so there's the initial filings, and then, ISO or AUC comes back and says, what about the following, 10 things? And you go, okay, great. Here are my answers. And then they say, okay, these are the things we'd like you to go and like continue working on. This is where we think there are some concerns. So we want to see more information about it. And so it really is a back and forth and a dialogue. Which is one of the reasons it takes so long to do. It's not because there's so many things that have to go into the applications. It's because there are there's lag periods of, I give you a bunch of information, you look at it, you say, okay, I want, the following answers, and back and forth. And so it definitely, like I said, I don't think anyone was given any prior warning, no matter where they were at in their application process.
I mean, the way that you explain it there is sort of an evolving conversation. The first thing that comes to mind for me is if it's this evolving conversation, it's not just like I filled out form X32B, give me my approval. If there is this evolving conversation, do you believe that a pause was required in order to do this review, in order to introduce any changes that may need to be introduced? Or is that something that could have been dealt with through that evolving conversation?
So if you actually read the two letters, there were there was a couple of issues that were identified, and one of the things that was identified by ISO, which is not addressed by any of this, is that there are too many applications because it's too good a deal to start building stuff here. People want to build renewables here. And so they were actually overwhelmed by the number of applications that are coming in. And they asked for help. This doesn't help anyone. I mean, it helps them catch up a little bit, I suppose, but this doesn't help anybody in that space. It doesn't provide additional resources. It doesn't, clarify sort of roles. It doesn't help the underlying issue that was sort of presented in that letter, which is we need help. We need more people. We need more money. We need more. So that doesn't really help anything. And the other thing too is, like I said, the interesting thing about how they've done this is they haven't really allowed room for transition. So normally, when you change laws, when you change processes that are ongoing, you don't just stop it and then start it again with different set of rules. For instance, I have a very interesting legal practice. So one of the things I do is I do estate administration, which is when people die and you apply to court for a grant of probate or a grant of administration. And we got an entirely new set of forms last year, whole different process. And we were allowed to keep filing on the old forms for a couple of months. I think it was 90 days, just to allow people time to, you're in the middle of stuff. It's long, it's hard. Like, give them. It's not a stop and start process. You got to give people time to adjust. And so, that's normally how these processes work. It's not just a stop and start. And, back to sort of the interim information requirements, which I find hilarious that were released yesterday. They're not overly different than what's actually already in the requirements. So I'm not sure what we think is doing better. And these are all things they could have asked for anyways. So I'm struggling to see how we've improved this. Or how any of this is going to improve the process, because right now all I'm seeing is some very strong kowtowing to a particularly small group of individuals.
So with that being said, one of the other questions that I had for you before I wanted to move on is there the risk that because this is a 5 step process, is there a risk? You know, one of the things that the Alberta government has used to justify this is, oh, we needed a clear line in the sand. Okay, sure, I guess. But is there a risk that somebody could have gone through steps 1 and 2 and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars or more to put together what's required in steps 1 and 2, and then they get to step 3, and now all of a sudden, who knows what the changes are going to be? I mean, we still have like 5 months left of them doing updates or whatever. Uh, is there a risk that there could be changes made enough so that those projects are just, they walk away from them?
I think the risk in people walking away at this point is whether or not they've already invested a bunch of time and money and they have to go do a whole bunch of different things. Because again, like I said, I'm not seeing a ton of differences other than for reclamation, which I think is hilarious um, as a general rule. But I don't know if it's going to create some sort of economic challenges in terms of um, the cost of these projects and whether or not they're going to be able to fund them, whether or not they're going to be able to um, build them in an economic way. I mean, ultimately, what I would say is the cost, and and I think everyone who's a consumer of energy in this province is well aware. Energy companies, electricity companies are making a killing here. And so I think it would take a lot to make these projects uneconomic. I think the risk you're going to have is not the projects that have been started, but again, going back to that certainty principle, whether or not anyone's going to put capital into projects like this in the future because you don't know how long it's going to take you to get that return. Right? Like I think if you have enough sunk costs, you're just going to move forward because you have to, and you've already sunk enough money into it. But I think it will definitely, and the behavior of this government will definitely give people pause in considering, you know, if I could go build a solar farm here or I could build it in Texas, and I know that the Texas government's just going to do the thing that they said they were going to do, I might as well go build it in Texas. And I do know that there's at least one project that ended up getting uh, moved to Texas on that basis. So,
Oh, wow. Um, I mean, you talk about the behavior. That opens a window for me that I'm going to jump through. Um, are you aware? I mean, you're much more inside the sphere of how these things work than the average Albertan. Do you know why this happened, the moratorium? Because we've seen from Danielle Smith when they made the announcement, they included these 2 letters and they said, "Oh, see, the AUC and AESO, they asked for it." And then a bunch of people actually read the letters and went, "No, they did. They didn't do that though. They didn't ask for it. They said we have these problems." And the other ones said, "Thanks for the heads up about the pause." And then Smith pivoted to, but you know what? It was the RMAs. It was the rural municipalities of Alberta. They said that they really wanted to pause. They did 2 resolutions about it. And then people went and actually read the resolutions and said, no, they didn't. And I mean, just recently, I mean, that conversation's been going on for a few weeks, but just recently the Globe and Mail confirmed it as well, where they said, yeah, no, the president of the RMA said very clearly, we didn't ask for the moratorium. We welcome the conversation, and we're glad we're having the conversation because we have our own concerns, but we didn't ask for the moratorium. So, like, why is there a moratorium, I guess, is my question. Do we know? Or is just this more?
so I don't, and I say this as you're right. I would consider myself a bit of an insider, and I have been puzzling since this happened. You know, it's been about a month now. I've been puzzling since this happened as to who benefits, like who specifically benefits from this. And I've been really having a hard time finding a real answer as to who specifically is going to benefit from this, from this pause, from this shakeup, whatever. ever. And the only thing I can honestly come back to, and the only thing I can think of at all, is natural gas producers. Um, in terms of, like a large majority, a vast majority of the energy or the electricity generated in Alberta is generated from liquid natural gas. And so as the grid decarbonizes, as we move to and I had to set up an NMAX account for a house the other day, and you can actually pay extra. And I didn't know this. You can pay like a couple bucks extra to make sure that your electricity is sourced from a sustainable uh, 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 source. And so, which I didn't know. And so I thought that was super interesting. And I wonder how many people are taking advantage of projects or programs like that. And so it's the only lobbying group, not that they have like a specific lobby, that I could possibly think of that might be benefiting from something like this. Because ultimately, you look at some of these organizations where it's, the premier's office is trying to say, oh, well, the organizations themselves asked for it. And like you said, they said, well, no. And then, oh, no, it was RMA. We're trying to, listen to our rural community, and they said, well, no. Like we have concerns, but this isn't the thing we asked for. And so it's the only thing I can sort of come back to in terms of an organization that or sort of like a group that would benefit from this, not only the moratorium, but scaring off investment in this specific space on an ongoing and prolonged basis.
I mean, we've had the team here has a running bet that we're going to see an announcement for a new or a couple of new natural gas power plants, because one of the lines of rhetoric that the Smith government has been using is, oh, they're great, solar and wind, they're great, but sometimes the sun doesn't shine. What are you going to do? Sometimes the wind doesn't blow. And it's like, have you ever been to southern Alberta? But the thing that they've been pivoting to is, we need the base load. We got to have the natural gas for the base load. We need more natural gas. Smith did a whole thing where she talked about how she was horrified that there were no new natural gas projects that were being created in the province of Alberta. So it definitely seems like I don't know, some people might say that they're picking winners and losers economically, which is fascinating for a conservative / libertarian government. But it's wild to see that there is still, like, this was announced August 3rd. We're recording this today on September 7th, and we still don't know why this is a thing.
I don't think we're going to know why this is a thing. I don't know that anyone's ever going to come up with a real answer. I don't think there's ever going to be the one meeting that happened where this was spawned out of that. And so I don't know that that's where we're going to have a true clear answer to that, at least from a political perspective. Unless, it turns out that a bunch of ministers own a gas power plant. Um, I don't know. And I find it so interesting, the argument about the base load, because you look at sort of, the rest of the country, and the numbers are completely flipped in terms of electricity being generated from, fossil fuels. We're at 80 something percent. And every other province in this country, it's almost 80% renewables, if not more. I remember I grew up in British Columbia for reference, and I remember like being, a kid, and being asked to run large appliances at night to help even out the baseload. And I will tell you that as an adult, I still do that. I run my dishwasher at night. I run my laundry, like I turn the laundry on at night. I run the dishwasher, like I do all of these things at night to even out the baseload. And so it's a thing you can do, and it's a thing you can definitely condition the population to do. clearly it stuck with me. It's been 30 years, and I still do it, and I don't even live in that province anymore. And so, there, I think we as Albertans need to take ownership and responsibility for our energy consumption. And, you know, the government need, I mean, the government money is dumb money. I dislike them picking winners and losers on any front. And I can give you a whole other segment on why I hate government programs, as a liberal, hilariously. But it I don't think we're so incapable as a population that we can't just like make small changes to our behaviors, that could definitely see us have a better and more decarbonized grid. And so, and I think people find it frustrating as well. And you have to think about, secondary steps. Like if you have an electric vehicle in this province, you might as well just drive a gasoline powered vehicle, because the energy that's being put that the electricity you're putting into that car is creating just as many emissions as gasoline at this point.
But I mean, to your point though, if somebody was, because I know that we're going to get some people, aha, you see, electric vehicles are evil. But correct me if I'm wrong. But if you were in a province where that ratio of power generation was flipped, if you were in somewhere that had the 80% renewables, all of a sudden the market become like using an electric
It does
vehicle makes
become
more sense.
it becomes decarbonized. It definitely does. You have to look at the whole life cycle of what kind of electricity are you putting in your vehicle, because at the end of the day, it's only as good as the actual emissions it's produced. And if you're, hydro, you're not producing emissions. Solar, wind, you're not producing emissions. Tidal power, you're not producing emissions. And so, um, I mean, you could sort of like, if you really broadly wanted to talk about the carbon intensity of that electricity, how much carbon goes into making the steel, how much carbon goes into trucking that there. You can really do like a full life cycle analysis. I think James Coleman's done a couple of really good ones. He's a law professor. He spent a very brief time at the U of C and then has gone off back to America. But he's energy law prof on Twitter or whatever it's called now. And so you could really just, I think, life cycle analysis that out, but in a very immediate way, you can sort of see the link between, if I'm putting dirty electricity into my car, then I might as well just be driving a gasoline powered car. But that's the same thing with heating our houses, right? You could heat your house with electricity, or you could heat it with natural gas. At this point, it doesn't really matter in this province, but it could. We could make it matter. We have the
Is that,
power to make it matter.
I mean, as you were speaking there, I could just see the next Smith argument coming out. Hey, you know what? The reality is, because of how we have to generate our electricity in this province, we have to use natural gas. We just don't have any other choice. Using electrical cars doesn't make any sense. But hydrogen cars, let me tell you, because that's been another one of her big talking points. So as you're saying that, I'm like, I wonder if that's another pivot point, because she always does that. She always has that.
Is there a commercially viable hydrogen car? No.
But there could be. We could bring that industry to Alberta for manufacturing, because Alberta is a.
I could also breed unicorns if I tried hard enough, I'm sure.
That's the Alberta advantage right there. Unicorns and hydrogen
Yeah,
cars.
I could definitely breed unicorns if I tried hard enough. I'm sure I could get there. I'm sure I could get there. It might take thousands of generations. We have to talk about things that are feasible and a reality. We can't, talk about um, the what ifs of the world. Some of them are a lot more reasonable than others. And I think that there's a very easy and immediate, not easy, but like there's a very immediate step we can take to decarbonize our grid. Um, and it is having more renewable projects connected to the grid. The money's there, the people are there, the projects are there. So why not just take that step forward? Um, it's it it's all already there. It's not some unproven technology. It's not some pie in the sky kind of argument. We're not waiting for the technology to get there. It's there. So why not do it? And the thing that sort of chuffs me is everyone else is. So why do we have to be so contrarian to not want to participate in making sure that our planet is safe, that our population is safe, that we're, being good stewards of the land for future generations, and really, um, uh, fighting back against what a better life for everybody. I'm not really sure that that's something that and ultimately cheaper energy prices. See, this is the part that like is so ridiculous. It makes it cheaper, everyone. Like this is you want to stop paying so much for your energy, for your electricity, make it renewable. That's it. That's the end. Would you like it to be cheaper? And this is why, big C conservatives kind of like drive me insane because are you not here for the market to make shit cheaper for everyone?
Well, this is where it gets interesting because one of the criticisms, I mean, I think that you're right. I think that if all things were equal, then we would see more renewables result in lower electricity prices. But one of the problems that's been identified, not only by a number of economists and energy people, but also literally by the premier herself, is the reason why energy prices are so high isn't because of supply. It isn't because of a mixture of renewables and non-renewables. It's because of a principle called apparently economic withholding, where the power companies are like, hey, supply and demand. Boy, if we did the supply thing, stuff would be cheap. We wouldn't make that money. How about we decrease the supply for fun, and that will increase the cost that people have to pay for it. So it almost seems like, hey, we don't want to have this conversation about what's going to lower the prices, because if we do, then we'd have to acknowledge that it was our government that enabled the economic withholding to happen, and we're actually the reason why your prices are so high. So hey, sometimes the wind just doesn't blow.
So here's I'm well aware of the concept of economic withholding, which is also goes by another name, and it's called collusion.
You know? I mean, yes.
We all got mad when Loblaws did it to make bread prices higher. We all get mad when when it appears, at least nominally, that gas stations like to match their prices to each other. Um, Fun fact, kind of illegal. And so things like economic withholding or collusion, and I'm just going to call it collusion because that's what it is. And there's no need to skirt around it. It's not involuntary involuntary swimming, involuntary
Mm.
drowning. Um, it the more players there are in the market, the less likely you can do that, right? Because eventually, not everyone will participate in something like that. They will just price it to the market. The broader the market, the less likely this is to happen. Um, Hashtag and OPEC. But whatever. So you can deal with that by simply having more people on the market, and being able to push that power through. This is a thing where at this point free market might actually be the answer.
I want to wrap up, because this was the fun thing that I wanted to do. I want to wrap up with a bit of a rapid fire where we're going to juxtapose your answers with the fact sheet provided by the provincial government, because uh, I got into it a little bit with one of the high-ranking government folks, where he said, "Hey, where's the lie? How is it being dishonest or misrepresenting?" And he didn't reply back after I said, "Well, how about here and here and here?" So I want to get, but I'm by no means an expert. I'm just somebody who has a reasonably good bullshit filter. So I'm going to run through the questions. If you could give me your take on the answers, and then we'll let you get back to your very busy day. Why were renewable applications to the AUC paused while the AUC conducts its inquiry? What do you think the answer to that question is?
What do I think it is, or what should it be?
I want to know. Give me the no spin answer.
Uh, because they're not very creative in dealing with problems.
What will happen to workers in the industry during this phase? Is it going to affect the blue collar workers who are trying to put food on the table?
They're all going to get laid off. I don't know what they think is going to happen.
Won't, and we just had this conversation, but it's the next one on the list, so I'm going to ask it anyway. Won't adding more renewables solve the problem of high electricity prices?
It can, if you let the free market reign.
I know, and you've already answered this one, and you had an example of a company that you know that moved its project from Alberta to Texas. Are we going to miss out on investments because of this pause?
Entirely. Not just for the next 6 months, but for years to come.
Okay. Do you know there's some debate because the Parkland Institute did like a thing where they said it's going to affect anyone between 91 to 118 projects. The government claims there's going to be only 13 projects. Do you have any idea how many projects are actually impacted by this 7-month moratorium?
I'm going with about 100.
Okay, so more than 20.
More than 20. Less than a million.
What was the timeline for the government decision to impose the pause? And this is where, again, the government says, hey, we were listening to the RMA, the ASO, and the AUC.
I think someone got drunk one night and decided this is what they were doing. And they decided in a week or 2 weeks.
What was the plan for engagement with industry and impacted groups?
There wasn't one.
Why can't concerns over land use and reclamation be handled without a pause?
They could have been.
Does the government subsidize renewable projects? Sorry?
No, they don't. Every participant has said that they could have done this without pausing it. Do they subsidize projects? The provincial government? No.
Why is there no pause on oil development?
Because those people donate to conservative parties.
Why are foreign companies choosing Alberta for renewables generation?
They're not anymore, so good luck.
This is probably my favorite one, and I know that you talked a little bit about this in the pre-interview, so we might spend a little bit more time on it. That's okay. How does respect for property rights impact community concerns? So here we're talking about the concerns from the RMA about, hey, we wanted to develop the land this way. The solar panels, they're so ugly. Why can't we just put up some nice colorful pump jacks? Maybe make them different colors, not rainbow, but we could do some things with the pump jacks. What do you make of the argument? Because there's a lot of farmers who are saying, hey, if I want to put a solar farm up on my land, I should be able to put a solar farm up on my land. And if you don't like the look of it, look in the other direction. But you have people who are saying, but I don't want to look in the other direction. And you have municipalities who are saying, no, we want to be in charge of how that land is developed. What do you make of that argument?
I think it's antithetical to everything that this conservative government stands for. And I think that it is an affront to property rights. I generally am anti-NIMBY anything. I love development. I love building shit. I think that we have, as a community, we need to be more collective, though, in and less individualistic in terms of, well, I don't like it. Too fucking bad. I also don't like forest fires, and I don't like not being able to go outside because I can't breathe the air. And I generally like food, and I generally like, being able to turn on the lights, things like that. You know what I don't like? I don't like people cutting off their heat because they're in the winter because they can't afford it. I would think everyone has the right to be comfortable, to have shelter, to have enough food to eat. And we need to do a better job of disregarding some of these very internalized, well, I don't like it. Too bad. I don't like poverty. I don't like environmental damage. I don't like those things. And so we need to do a better job as a society of putting aside those individual dislikes, and saying, you want to know what? It's better for the community if that farmer, one, can do whatever the fuck they want with their land, or whether that is a solar farm, whether that is, cattle, whether that is, as long as we are good, like we have some underlying principles of being of good stewards of the land, of being good stewards of our communities. um, we can we need to stop, saying, oh, you can't build something there because I don't like it. Well, I don't like you. So
One of the things that's fascinating to me about the whole property rights argument is you hear people saying, "Oh, but the solar panels, they get in the way of the growing." And
the only legitimate conversation I think we need to be having is about arable land and food security, because those are important things. But I guess my question on that will come down to the following. What are we doing now to protect arable land? Because it's not a lot. Again, I came from British Columbia, love BC, reasons I don't live there anymore. But um, in British Columbia, they actually have something called the Agricultural Land Reserve. So in the 1970s, the province just designated all arable land as part of a reserve, and you can only do specific things with it. And in order to do anything other than the specific list of things, one of which is a golf course, don't ask questions, I don't know. Uh, you have to actually apply on a plot by plot basis to remove the land from the reserve. So if you wanted to, for instance, build a house on it, you have to. That's not just like a farmhouse for farming. You have to make an application to the provincial government and show why you should be able to use it for something else. And so if our concern, and this is a broader concern than simply renewable energy, if our concern is food security, if it's the use of arable land for other purposes, what are we doing on a broader scale to deal with that issue? And the answer is nothing. We only are dealing with this because we don't like renewable energy, in a very specific limited set. And so I think that that's a broader conversation that needs to happen exclusive from the conversation around renewable energy, because it's it's a broader conversation that needs to be had by society about how do we keep food security in our country, in our in our province. We saw lots of issues in the pandemic around that, and I won't get too far into that, but water security and food security are huge problems. We've seen what happens when we don't deal with those issues, and we rely on sort of a global supply chain. And so that is an issue. That is legitimate. That is the only legitimate issue in this entire conversation that I will take away and tell people that they need to actually have a conversation about. It is the only one. I don't care if you don't like The View anymore, friends.
I mean, my question, I just go back to like, there's that gif of the little girl who does the why not both? And I go back to that because, as much as you can say, and I agree, food security, huge issue, especially with the effects of climate change on arable land. But the counterpoint I have is like, how much growing are you doing in February in Alberta?
Well, and I mean that is a solid question. And so why not both? Why not both? That's actually it's not a little girl. It's the one from Cusco.
Well, there's a couple of different ones I've seen.
Um, and so no, you definitely not. And so the question becomes: is it easily removable? Is it something you could do in certain times and then remove it and grow? Does it have an effect on the soil? Because there are processes where you're going to want that the sunlight to hit and the snow to hit that soil so that it doesn't dry up, things like that. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a creative way to do both at different times of the year. There might be, and but that is probably the only legitimate actual concern that I am happy to have a conversation about, because I think it's the only one and to a much smaller extent, reclamation. But those are the only two real problems that have. But these have always been problems, and it's the same conversation with the oil sands. How much of that was arable land? I don't know, but not now. It's definitely not going to be anytime soon. Like that one's over. That one's done. And so those are broader conversations we need to be having as a society about should we be protecting certain kinds of land for use. I mean, for instance, I don't know if you all know this, but you actually need a order in council to buy land inside of a county, outside of a city or a village or a town, if you are not a resident Canadian. Called the Foreign Ownership of Land Act.
Why don't we do that with like houses? Because I mean, we're totally going down a rabbit hole, but like there's this housing crisis that's going on, and a lot of it has to do with people buying properties.
We need a whole different episode for that, my friends. Whole different episode if you want to talk about the housing crisis.
Okay, I may take you up on that. Last one on the list. And I'll read the question and then I'll read part of the response from the government. Is the pause connected to federal clean energy regulations? They say not directly, but efforts to decarbonize Alberta's electricity sector make it especially important that Alberta properly develops renewables. A couple of paragraphs, the end paragraph. Electricity is a necessity of modern life as they stand now. The CER regulations would require Alberta to have a net zero by 2035, which would condemn many Albertans to energy poverty. By pausing now to develop and streamline processes, streamlining, for example, by adding 18 new requirements, we're laying the foundation to further support long-term growth of investment in renewables while helping Alberta meet its emission goals, including being carbon neutral by 2050 in an affordable manner. What do you make of that answer?
This just sounds like a toddler saying, I don't want to do it. You can't make me.
I love
That's
it.
all this is. This is a toddler. This is a 3-year-old toddler yelling, I don't want to. You can't make me.
So it is kind of connected to the federal clean energy regulations in that the toddler has spoken.
Pretty much. Which I find, and I've made this comment other places, I find hilarious because if you go and read, and I'm just going to plug his book again because I love it. If you go and read the federal clean energy guidelines, and then you go and read Triple Crown by J.S. Rio and Jim Prentice, it's like someone sat there with a thesaurus and just kind of changed the words. Like it's word for fucking word the same shit. So go listen to your elders, friends, and go do this because conservatives know that this is a real problem. Real conservatives know this is a real problem, and real conservatives are trying to do something about this.
Jim Prentice, the famous NDP premier, I assume you're referring to.
Yes, I am definitely referring to the famous liberal shill, Jim Prentice.
Lindsay, you've been extraordinarily generous with your time. I've already pushed way past what you committed to. I'm going to give you the floor here. Is there anything else that you want people to hear? Is there anything that you want to say about the Renewables Moratorium or even just your favorite type of cheese? It's all yours.
I mean, my favorite type of cheese is blue cheese. So that's cool. But I mean, like I love cheese generally. No, if I could say anything to everyone, this is incredibly important. We have spent a whole summer seeing exactly why this is going to continue to be more important in our communities across the world, and we need to do something now, and we need to be better as voters in rewarding people who do good work and not rewarding people who sensationalize attempts by other people to do work to do that good work. We will not get anywhere if we do this individually. We need to do it as a collective, and I have a lot more faith, I think, in Albertans than this government seems to. So do your part, whether it's writing to your MLA, whether it's bitching about this on Twitter, whether it's making better energy choices. We all have a part to play, and it may not seem like you're doing a lot, but every little bit counts, and everything that each of us can do will count.
Awesome. Lindsay, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. If people want to follow you on the Twitter, the X, or the Threads, or it's all, there's just so much now.
It's just my name, Lindsay Amantea.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
And that's it for another episode of The Breakdown. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, we would love nothing more than if you thought about signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce this kind of content. Whether you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, in which case, maybe leave a review and a rating, or whether you're watching it on one of our streaming platforms, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who is part of the Breakdown's audience. And as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.